I don't know if to sit or stand. I might sit down. There we go. Good morning. Good afternoon, everyone. How is everyone? All good? So I just wanted to start by understanding who was going to be in the room, just so that I haven't really prepared anything in detail. It's quite broad, so I thought I would just get a show of hands of where people are coming from, so that we can maybe tailor the conversation to their particular fields or whatever. So is anyone an artist in the room? Okay, good. What about management? Okay, this is fairly split. This is all good. Anyone students? No students in the university? Excellent. Is anyone in the wrong class? I don't know. Okay, cool. I was actually hoping that it was going to be a pretty even split between artists and management. So that works great for what we're about to go through. Hopefully everyone shouldn't be too bored for that reason. So just to introduce myself, I'm Nick. I head up the streaming and digital strategy at ADA in the UK, which is part of Warner Music. So I essentially have a roster of about 50 independent labels and artists, work across hundreds of artists, putting out quite a few tracks every week. And in the last year or so, I've had the pleasure of working on a #1 album in the UK with a band called The K's. I've worked with a DJ called Sonny Fodera, who owns his own music and has had 2 double platinum singles in the UK, one of which reaching #5 in the UK chart in the last year. I work with a brilliant jazz drummer called Yusuf Days, who you might have seen on YouTube. If you haven't seen him on YouTube, I would strongly advise you to go check him out. And then I work with loads of old school catalogue artists such as Orbital as well, and some great independent labels too. So my job is to essentially be the bridge between the label and the artist and DSPs, so people like Spotify, Apple, Amazon, but that also is extended out to the likes of Instagram and TikTok, SoundCloud, etc. So my job is to essentially take their music into those platforms, have the conversation with the editors of those platforms and the representatives of those platforms, and tell the story of the artists and update them on the progress in which the artist is making in their own personal careers, highlight any wins that they've had recently, highlight any upcoming tours that they have, the number of tickets they're selling, etc. And essentially just be a champion for both the artists and labels. As we all know, when you run an indie label, you're limited in the number of personnel that you have in the team. And so I act as the extension of that team from within the distributor to make sure that their artists are being represented fairly versus the major conglomerates of the world. So I guess some of you might be a bit confused that I work for Warner Music, which is one of the big scary conglomerates, but I am a massive advocate for independent artists and independent labels. And so that's why I choose to come to places like this and vouch for independence, essentially. And so I'll just go through my general day-to-day, and then also just try and give some of my learnings and things that I've seen along the way that I think have really benefited artists in their release strategy. And I'll cater it to the more development end of releasing. As I guess that's where everyone is going to be operating, and it's all about building that momentum from the ground up so that you can then grow into the bigger artists and have those moments of success along the career. And to be honest, independence is all about building longevity. If you keep hold of your catalogue, then you're essentially building up an asset fund. You've got to think about it as like a pension pot. For every release that you're putting out, you're adding into your pension pot and you're building a catalogue. And if that catalogue is successful and drives good revenue, you can move that catalogue around and it becomes an asset for you to negotiate with in future conversations with future distributors, etc. So that's why I'm sort of a strong advocate for independency. The first thing I wanted to go through is maybe just the considerations that people have when they're getting going. And I like to sort of say to people to like consider the real life sort of things that are going on and the digital things that are going on, consider them as plants and sort of like water them in equal amounts so that they grow at the same time. And so think about things like in the real life sort of landscape, they're the things like touring, playing live, getting in the room, rehearsing, writing songs, exploring other creative hobbies outside of music, I would say. If I know loads of artists who are like really into cooking and things like that. And I think they're the sort of moments where they can diversify their sort of like content online and just make their socials a little bit more interesting and actually just expand their music out into other audiences. You know, people who like cooking and follow cooking stuff are also into music just the same and could discover you via that route just as much as you plugging your own music. And so if you're doing all of those things in real life and you're sort of like building up a good sort of fan base in the live space and selling tickets, etc., then you're obviously going to start playing bigger rooms. And in that moment, that's your opportunity to sort of collaborate with videographers, start filming some of your gigs. Even in the rehearsals, I'll go on to show you an example of how you can like use your rehearsal space to then bring it onto the sort of digital platforms and grow your audience via that. There's an amazing band called South Arcade that I currently work with, who have essentially built their momentum in the digital landscape by just having fun in the rehearsal studios, making really fun content that just works online. I was in an Instagram workshop at Instagram's office a couple of weeks ago, and one of the panel members there used South Arcade as an example of his favourite artist to follow on Instagram right now, because he said he felt like he is in the band because it's sort of that fly on the wall content of watching the band, and he just feels very much part of that journey, and they're just having a laugh, and it's just fun to sort of watch and consume. And so I think if you're doing all of those things in real life, you have a great opportunity to then take that onto the digital landscape as well. And if you're doing enough in real life, then you will never ever run out of things to post about online, in my opinion. And if you're doing enough, if you have enough variety in real life, then you will also have variety in what you're posting online. And I think one of the things that artists often sort of mention to me and struggle with is that perhaps they don't feel comfortable about posting online. And I completely understand that and completely resonate with it. I personally don't feel comfortable posting online, but I think it's about sort of finding your tone of voice in your communications, leaning into your personality. If you are more of an introvert and you don't like sort of putting personality content on there, then I would advocate you to go and sort of search for other artists that resonate with you. And I mean, the whole industry is sort of based on people sort of nicking the odd idea here and there anyway. So I would go and find some other artists who have a really great social presence. People like South Arcade, you might watch some of their content and go, this is great, I love how they do it, and just try and recreate it in your own way. And so I think, you know, there are a lot of mental barriers to entry in social media, but I think there are also a lot of solutions as well. If you just sort of put the time in, do a little bit of research, and you can then amplify everything that you're doing in real life and start to build momentum with your digital landscape as well. And quite quickly, if you're able to build up that really engaged audience, then you're going to pick up quite a lot of momentum in your release strategy as well. And again, similar to South Arcade, you'll see they have nearly 500,000 followers on Instagram these days, with a highly engaged audience. And I'll go into it a little bit more later on, but engagement is everything in social media as well, and engagement is now everything across DSPs too. It is getting people to interact on your platforms and save songs to library, etc., because that's where the algorithm starts to learn. I know it's a scary word, but it is the world that we live in, and I would just encourage people to lean into it and problem solve. So the first piece of advice that I often give to development artists, people that sort of like come in looking for their first deals, artists that I sort of see at festivals like this who maybe have a conversation with me after the gig, etc. The first thing that I say to them is don't rush. I see so many artists, and I, for one, fell victim to this as well. I used to be in a band when I was about 19, and I remember when we used to record music, we were like tripping over ourselves to like want to put it out. We would record it and then we would want to release it like the following Friday. And I think having sort of spent the last sort of 6-7 years working in music, I've learned that was actually our downfall. And actually, if you take your time and sort of do all of these things that I've been speaking about so far and build some momentum, then you will have much more longevity as well. So quite often I say, by all means, go ahead and record, keep recording, keep writing. Like, they're the most important things, Your art and your music are your most important assets. So by all means, build the bank and have them in the bank, but don't share them immediately until you feel that you're ready to share them, because there are lots of things that you can do where you sort of can share them, but without actually sort of fully releasing them into the world. And I'll give you an example in the next couple of slides of a band called Keo that came in to see us about a year ago. A really, really cool sort of kind of like a sort of like stonery rock band from London. I went to see them at this venue called Windmill in Brixton. Really cool venue. Again, like choose venues that align with your sort of like scene and culture, because a lot of the people that go to Windmill in Brixton are going there to find new bands and discover new bands, and will associate the venue with the band themselves. So even them playing that sort of venue meant that there was a lot of people from the culture just sort of going to check them out. And in that moment, they were building like a lot of momentum in the live space, subsequently sort of amplifying that on their digitals as well. And then the key thing that they did, which was really impressive and that caught all of our attention in the A&R space at Warner, was that they hadn't released anything on Spotify. There was no presence on Spotify. And I think there's a great piece of advice that Steve Jobs gave that I always sort of carry with me in a lot of things that I do, whether it's sort of instructing artists about ticket sales and doing underplays, is that scarcity creates demand. And so when people can't find something online, it sort of like rises their intention to sort of like find it. And so the clever thing that Keo did, they essentially had a track, but it was on a private SoundCloud link. And that SoundCloud link was essentially started to be shared, doing the rounds around the culture, around people wanting to go and see Keo, wanting to hear the music, not being able to get it on Spotify, but then feeling like they were being served by the band and feeling part of this like cultural sort of moment, because they were able to get hold of this like private SoundCloud link. That SoundCloud link ended up in my inbox. I ended up checking them out. I sent it to my boss, etc. And that SoundCloud link started picking up momentum from SoundCloud A&Rs, and ultimately found them their manager, and they're now signed with Wolf Alice's management, who also have the likes of Alt J as well. So signed with a really big management company, and all of a sudden their whole world is then opened up to new deals, a new network, all just from this like seed that they planted in the very early stages, from when they had pretty much nothing but they just built momentum and built hype, and it all came from not rushing the release. Eventually they went on to sign a distro deal with AWOL, and their EP did like 250,000 streams in the first month of release. It was pretty nuts. And Spotify subsequently and all the other DSPs have been big supporters. You know, their live presence is starting to grow. I think there we go, I can play you a bit of the tune now to give you their vibe. But this was essentially the SoundCloud link. It doesn't show the number of streams on there. But this SoundCloud link was at like 75,000 streams before they'd even signed a deal because of the culture that they'd been able to build around it. I'll give you a little taste of what they sound like. Yeah, so I don't know whether you saw some of the comments coming up in this bottom section. That was what I was talking about in regards to engagement as well. And, you know, I thought it was interesting that the first comment as well on that SoundCloud was Spotify now. And it's that scarcity and demand thing where people have got this SoundCloud link, but they can't get it anywhere else and they want it somewhere else. And so that's the most important thing on that. And then as you sort of saw the comments sort of move through, there's other people that have seen them at places like Moth Club in London, people wanting Manchester dates, and they've just sort of built this community on SoundCloud, and it built from the ground up from there essentially. And now they're going to go on to be a sort of international touring rock band, following in the steps of the likes of Wonderhorse, etc. as well. So it's just because they nailed that first rollout before they ever released any music. There's other people that have used similar strategies to this as well. The Last Dinner Party also followed quite a similar strategy. They didn't put any music out for ages. They sort of hustled their way to quite a big agent deal, and they basically just got on some really big bills for the year before they put any music out, played on some big festival lineups, put themselves in front of a massive audience of people. Again, couldn't find their music anywhere, and it's really frustrating, but there's just the hype around it, and that's what this industry has been built on since it began, really. So just something to bear in mind. I'll give you another couple of examples as well. This is actually a band that I work with called Kulturakademin, one of my favourite new artists out there at the moment. And this is just quite another fun anecdote that comes from SoundCloud. They were also sharing music with each other, bouncing bounces back and forth. And you can make things private or public on SoundCloud when you're uploading. And they were sending the demo of Television to one another just so that they could hear what each other were doing with the bounce. And I think Duncan had maybe forgot to put it on private and had sent it across, and so it ended up going public, and a SoundCloud A&R clocked it, listened to it, loved it, put it on some random SoundCloud sort of developing playlist, It then started picking up a bit of traction. Someone then saw it and then sent it to their now manager, Chris, who then picked it up, loved it, and just got in touch and said, I want to work with them. And then subsequently, they signed a deal with a label that I work with called Lab Records, who also work with South Arcade. Lab also did the number one album with the K's that I mentioned earlier. And Lab is a great sort of infrastructure. I'll go into that in a little bit further down the line. But this is just a good anecdote of, a happy accident on SoundCloud that has led for this band to essentially get their first record deal. And again, they're just sort of like building momentum and building from the ground up. They work really hard on their socials. I would go and visit their socials after this. If you get a moment, their socials are really good, and just sort of lean into their personality. But I'll give you a little spin of this is as simple as it gets in terms of how you find your moment. Yeah, they are an amazing band, by the way. Go and listen to their music if you're into anything that's a little bit like jungle and things like that. And then, obviously, I've mentioned it quite a lot. Going back to what I spoke about earlier, this is how South Arcade have sort of like built their online presence just by making content that works for their fan base, works for their culture, works for their scene on the online sort of stratosphere, but then bring it very much into the real life with their live shows as well. Oh, I was hoping that wouldn't happen, but I'll give you a little taste. Super simple, like really, really, really simple on the digitals. But they quickly learn that the algorithm sort of loved that content, and they just test different things. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. This format works for them really well. I mean, you can see on the post there. That's all you need to look at. Cool. So as I mentioned earlier, for the people that might be a little bit confused as to why someone from Warner Music is coming and being such a strong advocate for independency versus the major labels, and I don't want to sit here and say never sign a frontline record deal with a major label. Like, absolutely, I would never ever say that to anyone. I think both have massive pros and cons. In my personal opinion, I just think independency is maybe best for a lot more people, given the way that the digital landscape works, and the power is sort of coming back to the artists. If the artists are sort of doing things in the right ways before they sort of sign the deals. So I just thought I'd give a sort of split in terms of, a lot of people may already understand a lot of this sort of stuff anyway. But with independency, the artist retains ownership of their masters, which I think is incredibly important in this day and age. If you're investing your time, effort and money into making those masters, and you're creating a platform in which you're creating demand, then in my opinion, you should try and retain ownership of those masters. There are different deals that you can strike along the way. You may want to go straight into distribution and just self-distribute via a chosen distributor. There are obviously lots of different options out there, all with their own features and services. A lot of them are sort of quite entry level, which is literally just upload it straight up to Spotify. Or there are some that, like myself at ADA, that come with like quite a lot of services where you'll get a marketing person, a label manager, a streaming person like myself. And so in those deals, there are sort of different percentages that get agreed upon. But a lot of the entry levels, they'll literally just be probably just like 10% distribution fee straight on. Maybe even less. You'll probably just have to pay like a nominal monthly fee. But quite often, we sign deals that are pretty much 80-20, meaning that the artist takes 80% of all royalties and then the distributor takes a 20% fee. The other option is that you could sign to an indie label. Quite often that's just done on like a JV 50-50, but you will still retain your masters in those deals because you'll sign a deal that will essentially license them to the indie label for a specified period of time, which, can be anything between sort of like 3 to 10 years, depending on how much marketing advance they're giving, etc. But ultimately, after that period is finished, you will retain ownership of those masters, and it goes back to that thing that I was saying earlier about building that sort of like pension pot of catalogue that you own and you can take, and whenever you strike new deals, you have this catalogue that you can negotiate against. And if that catalogue is streaming well and selling well, then that will allow you to sign bigger, better deals that give you bigger marketing pots, etc. It's just how I think artists can stay smart in the modern era. On the flip side of that, as I said, there is still a place for major label deals. I just don't think they happen as often for developing artists as much as they maybe used to, because I don't think they need to happen that much. I think artists can build their base from the ground up using the methods that I've spoken about so far. But in South Arcade's instance, we've worked with them through Lab Records for the last few years, and they've built an amazing platform. They have since signed to Atlantic in the US in a really big deal that works for them. Usually when major labels sign something, they will basically buy the masters and they will own the masters in perpetuity. And those percentages usually turn on their head. But in return for that, they will offer up very large marketing funds. And you'll get a whole sort of team of specialists in marketing, promo, streaming, etc., all the same. And quite often they will offer tour support as well, which is the key thing for a lot of bands in the live space these days. It is becoming more and more difficult to tour internationally due to we could do a whole nother session on that as to the barriers to entry for the tour and live business these days. But I think tour support is probably one of the big things that artists would sign to a frontliner major these days, because it would allow them to sort of go to new territories and new markets that they've never played before, and build their business on that front. But in this day and age, I think, when frontlines sign a developing act and they offer big advances, etc., it then becomes very, very difficult to then ever recoup against those sums of money, which I think is why you maybe have to sort of build it from the ground up first and build a much bigger platform than what you might have had previously before signing to a major label, to then sort of make the major label sort of infrastructure work for you as an artist. So yeah, I just wanted to caveat that, I absolutely still think there's place for major labels in this industry. But I just think at the developing level, which we're all sort of focused on in this particular session, I would advocate for doing it independently so far. And then this may or may not interest you, I have no idea, but we can go through some best practice stuff. So imagine you're in the world where you have built that online presence, you've got a great social media following, you've got that SoundCloud link that is like popping with 75,000 streams on it, and a massive community of people that are wanting to hear your music, and yeah, they're chomping at the bit for you to release it on Spotify. And imagine you've signed a deal with a distributor or a major, depending on what you've done. Then I'm just going to go through the steps in which you should consider when you're delivering your music. So again, going back to the point that I made about not rushing it, when you are ready, this is another mistake that a lot of people make, is that they will ingest releases into the distributor maybe like a week before they want the track to come out. But in distribution world, there is a whole load of process that has to happen weeks in advance for the distributor to then set that track up properly internally with the DSPs. So just to give sort of context and reference on that, Spotify have over 100,000 tracks delivered to their platform every single day. Every day. It's crazy. And so for them to be able to support everything and listen to everything is impossible. And so they have a list of preferred partners and preferred distributors that they will essentially sort of have time with, receive grids from, listen to priorities. And this is where my job comes in. In this sort of 4-week window, once the track is delivered, this is where I do all of my work. I send the schedule across to Spotify. I highlight the priorities like South Arcade, Kulianji, etc. that I've spoken about so far. And I will go in and pitch those releases and give a bit of an update in terms of where the artist is at, any growth that they've had on social media, what gigs they've been doing, what tickets they've been selling, etc. And just sort of building that profile across all of the partners, not just Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, YouTube, SoundCloud, Instagram, TikTok, all of them. Just so that when the track does come out, it gets the best possible launch that it could possibly receive. And so I would always advocate to deliver 4 weeks before your planned release date, so that all of these things can be put into motion. You can upload the sound onto socials. You can start using that sound on your socials. In that period, you might learn that you're getting really positive feedback, which is great. You can use that in your pitching. You might even learn that you're putting the sound up and it's just not connecting with your audience. In that period, you could actually learn to pivot if you're not getting a good vibe from what you've made. That's perfectly acceptable in my mind. And a lot of artists do that these days. So that's another reason to sort of give yourself that advanced period of time to just sort of test how things work in the digital landscape. And then from then on, once it's delivered, as I've previously mentioned, there's the opportunity for the distributors to sort of ingest everything, make sure that operationally nothing goes wrong. Quite often artists will try and post stuff, but will get a copyright notice. So you can just sort of fix all those problems. And in that time, it allows you to sort of create all of the assets that you need to create. And I'll go into what those are in the next slide, because it's very sort of cluttered in the digital landscape, and there are lots of things that you need to consider. And there are lots of platforms that have their own sort of features that they want to push. And I think if you lean into those features as well, it then advocates for those platforms to give you support. And so this is a conversation that I sort of marry between our artists and the platforms to ensure that the artists are sort of doing what the platforms want, so that we can get support from them along the way.
Sorry, can I ask a question?
Yes, of course. Sorry.
The 3-week one there. You mean start social promotion campaign? You mean like a snippet or something?
Exactly that. But you might already have an existing SoundCloud private link or whatever. I would you could do that. I would just keep that private, but you could make like a snippet that's maybe 30 seconds to a minute that's public, and put that on your public-facing profile, and you can start. I'll go into some of the SoundCloud stuff as well, but that's your sort of like social media. That's your like 30-second clip that you're sort of putting up, and I would have that delivered. I mean, even more than 4 weeks, depending on what socials that you're wanting to post regarding the clip and how much runtime you're wanting into the single. It's not a one-size-fits-all. It varies for all artists, I would say. You know, some artists like to just drop it the week before because there's a lot of heat on them, and they just prefer that sort of level of velocity. Some just like to post about it a lot over that time, and so it just depends on your own learnings of what your audience likes. Just going through the checklist for all the partners, the pitch in Spotify for Artists, I'll go into that in a sec as well. I get a lot of questions on this. It's super essential to have the pitch in basically as soon as possible after you've uploaded it into your distribution or handed it into your label, etc. Because Spotify specifically, their editors can't listen to a track unless it is pitched in Spotify for Artists. So if you've pitched it 4 weeks in advance, then great. That's given them a 4-week window. Hopefully, if you're with a good distributor and they're playing the records, etc., that editor can then go and listen to that record in advance, make a judgment, and hopefully give you some support out of the gates as well. Clips is a feature that Spotify are using, which is essentially sort of like reels across, it's just short form video. Canvas is essentially the 7-second sort of clip that you attach to tracks. Update your artist pick on Spotify when it comes out. Update your own artist playlist. Ensure your socials are linked. Update your bio, and if your release is 2 tracks or more and you have 15,000 monthly listeners or more, then you can set up a countdown. The countdown is really important on Spotify because, again, it's a demand metric that they will use. It's essentially like a pre-save metric as well, but it's direct on the Spotify platform, so they can see on their own end how many people have pre-saved your upcoming EP or album product. And if that metric goes nuts, then that's something that you can sort of like flag to them to ensure that they're supporting it properly. Then moving over to Apple. Apple have a slightly different pitching process. They have this process called Playbook, which is usually done via your distributor or label. They should have access to this. It's not really artist facing, but what I would advocate is for you to speak to your distributor and ensure that they're pitching via the Apple Playbook, just to ensure that you're getting playlisted. And then Apple also use artist motion and motion artwork. The specs are available online for that, and you can deliver those, which is essentially sort of like moving artwork on platform. I think it's worthwhile delivering it. I think it just looks really cool more than anything. And then they are users of Dolby Atmos. I didn't really include it in here because it's quite a sort of incurred cost, and may not be relevant for artists at this level. Similarly, on Amazon, they use a process called Maestro, and they also have a pitching service in Amazon Music for Artists, usually accessed by a distributor, so I'd maybe just have the conversation. And then SoundCloud, I've spoke about SoundCloud a lot. I couldn't be like a bigger advocate for it, to be honest, at the developmental level for artists. They have so many great features that can help build your community from the ground up. And so you can use things like snippets and teasers. You can DM people on SoundCloud. I know loads of people that DM other artists and DM fans. It even shows on SoundCloud now who your top listeners are. So you can DM them direct and build a sort of direct line of communication with the people that engage most with your SoundCloud profile. SoundCloud also have something called SoundCloud Amplify. So if you're a brand new artist and you've never used the platform or you're uploading a new track, then it's essentially like an algorithmic boost. And if you use SoundCloud Amplify, that track will then essentially blast it out. It will listen to the audio, it will blast it out to a bunch of people who it thinks will interact with it, and it will ensure that 100 people minimum hear that track, and it will then take the learnings of the engagement on that, and then modify it in the algorithm. There are repost campaigns. This is like a marketing thing. Again, just leaning into the engagement metrics. It's just encouraging people to sort of reshare your sound on their own profiles, which again boosts SoundCloud algorithm. And yeah, it's just a very community-led platform. I know loads of artists I work in the DJ space with. They quite often like share stems on their socials and in their broadcast channels, etc., and encourage their fans to just make their own creations using their stems, and will then use SoundCloud as a place to sort of share those things. And I've even had artists that have just sort of done that, seen like a remix or a reversion of their own track on SoundCloud, and then they've taken it and they've released it properly across all the other DSPs as well. YouTube, I feel like I could do a whole other sort of talk on YouTube, to be honest. It's by far and away the biggest revenue opportunity for anyone, to be honest, for all levels of artists. I think for as much as you put into YouTube, that can be a really, really big revenue source for you. So I would encourage you very early on these days to start considering your video content, whether it be long form or short form, and starting to sort of master that. In the early days, if I was in a band these days, I would be reaching out to sort of like videographers and almost bringing in a videographer as like the so-called fifth member of your band, to be honest, and hoping that you have someone who's in that world, who's looking for their break just as much as you are looking for your break. You know, they're looking to build their portfolio, and if you align in both of your creative vision, then and you split the opportunities on YouTube, then I think it can become a really fruitful platform for you. And so just a couple of optimizations on it. I would ensure that all of your channel tags and your video tags are updated with relevant search terms regarding to your culture. Pin your latest video to the homepage of your channel. Use YouTube Shorts and essentially link those shorts through to long form content. I would make sure that you add like a subscriber button to any of your content as well, so that there's just an easy place for people to subscribe should they like it. And as I just mentioned, like collaborate. YouTube now have a similar feature to what you see on Meta, where you can sort of do joint posts with people. You can do that on YouTube now, and you can tap into other audiences. That is something that I would strongly advocate, both across socials and on YouTube. As well, I didn't really talk about it already, but it's something that you should do in your music making as well. Just try and collaborate with other artists. I think it sort of started in the sort of like hip hop space, and then it has now sort of moved into the dance space quite a lot. But the great thing is I'm starting to see it happen even in the sort of like rock space as well now. And I think it works brilliantly if you find artists that are sort of aligned with your vision, and you can both piggyback on your own momentum. You know, it's how you build community. So those are the things that I would consider there. I mentioned this earlier, I just thought I'd put these up. This is by far like the most popular question I always get asked by people, is what do I include in the Spotify pitch? I had lunch with an editor from Spotify in New York in September, and had a really like interesting conversation with her. She obviously reads thousands of pitches every week, and so I just sort of said to her, like, I just asked her what she enjoys in pitches. And her advice was that she hates basically being told what the song sounds like in the pitch, because if she's reading the pitch, she's listening to the record. And we're talking about someone who listens to thousands and thousands of tracks every day. So, you know, she's got a pretty good judgment in terms of like what the track sounds like and maybe where it belongs and which culture, etc. So I would strongly advocate to artists to just not bother including that. I think you only get 500 characters in that pitch, so wasting it on what the track sounds like is not the way to do it. I would use it as an opportunity to to tell the editor what your artistry is about, and your sort of like creative influences, etc. A little bit about yourself in your bio, but then the most important thing, I think, is showing that you are working really hard. Show that there's a timeline of releases coming out. Show them that you have numerous shows in the diary. And quite an interesting thing that quite a lot of people sort of are quite surprised by this, but link through to like your best performing content and link through to your socials. Given that you only have 500 characters, I would try and use a short URL and go online and like change your URL to like a sort of 10 character short URL or something like that, so that you don't take up too much room in the pitch. But link it out to like a sort of like a bigger pitch, if you like, that sort of like shows who you are as an artist and what you're doing, because that is where editors at Spotify are going to get to know who you are and might even give you a follow, etc. And mention all of the other places that you're sort of like doing promo. Mention the articles that have talked about you. Mention the radio stations that might have played you, and mention any advertising that you're using to sort of run back to the platform. And then this is also something that I strongly recommend people use. Not a lot of people actually mention this to me, but I know Spotify are the big evil giants of the music industry, but they do actually have very, very helpful resources on their Spotify for Artists page, which essentially will give you a much more expanded version of everything that I've just been badgering onto about for the last 50 minutes. There's a full suite of ways in which you can build your online presence, not just on Spotify, but off platform as well. And just ways that you can sort of grow the algorithm on Spotify. So I would strongly advocate just spending a little bit of time like leaning into these and learning about the platform, because the things that you learn about here, you can sort of spread them out elsewhere, as I mentioned. Spotify also have a really good analytics platform. You may or may not get your own analytics platform for your distributors and for your label as well. But I would strongly advocate to sort of spend some time in your audience section of your Spotify for Artists, get to know your audience, have a look at how many people are engaged, and just take learnings of releases and have a look at your streaming numbers and just see what tracks are working and what aren't. I don't know, some artists do this a lot, and it makes my life hell sometimes because they're so in it and they ask me lots of questions, but it's great all the same. And I would just advocate people to do the same. And that's pretty much it. I was just going to open it up to questions. I know I focused a lot about the digital side of things. I didn't really mention the physical side because I predominantly operate in the sort of like digital side of distribution and streaming, etc. But I'm happy to sort of like talk about physical opportunities as well, because I know that is an increasingly sort of important opportunity for artists. But yeah, any questions? There you go. For educating everyone.
Question, if it's okay.
Oh yeah, cool. Of course.
I'm just like thinking about like, because last year we did like a release, 4-single release schedule during the spring.
Yeah.
And now we're gonna do the same this spring, is the idea. But I think it's really hard, the part like from artist perspective, like how to, we need to push out singles.
Yeah.
Is what people keep saying.
Yeah.
So we need to keep releasing stuff, so we're interested for to book or to play or fans and everything.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we also need to like keep it, don't release everything. So I think like that balance is really hard.
It is, yeah. It's definitely a hard balance, and it's hard when you've sort of like already started in that momentum, if you ask me. Which is why it's sort of like the first piece of advice that I always sort of tell anyone when they're just getting going, is that if you haven't put any music out, like, don't rush and wait. But often, quite a lot of the time, yeah, people have. And unfortunately, I think the way that sort of algorithms work, etc., then it's not impossible by any means necessary. It's not impossible, but it does definitely make life a little bit harder, because, you know, you need momentum in order for the algorithms to learn, and you need that engagement. The more people that are sort of saving your track to their library and adding it to their playlist is a moment for the algorithm to sort of learn who has done that, what kind of music does that person listen to, because it will then sort of like serve that record out in the radio to someone else who might like it. And if you're working from like a smaller base on that, you're limiting those opportunities. And so you might just need your break to come from social media. You might need one of your posts on a particular track that you're pushing to go kind of crazy. And then there should be some like trickle through on that. One thing I will mention is that Spotify also have something called discovery mode. I don't know whether you're aware of that.
It's very helpful for us.
Yes, that's like discovery mode. I nearly put it in here, but I chose not to because some distributors use it and some don't, so it wasn't going to apply to everyone. But since we're on the conversation, then I'll mention it. Discovery mode, again, it seems kind of like evil because it feels like a race to the bottom. It's Spotify taking a commission on fuck all already. Like, they don't pay artists anywhere near what they should, and for them to take even more of that just seems like insulting. But from a sort of more larger perspective, discovery mode will help artists because it gives that algorithmic boost and it serves it out to more people. And I use it a lot as an A&R tool as well. There are a lot of records that we've put out, and going back to that number again, you know, Spotify have 100,000 tracks every day. They can't service everything, like it's impossible, and so they have to rely on the algorithm to serve it out to people. But with that volume of tracks coming onto the platform, even the algorithm can't sort of serve it out to the right amount of people. So discovery mode gives it an opportunity to essentially cast it out to a load of people who it thinks will like it. And in that moment, if those people engage with it by liking it or saving it to their library or adding it to a playlist, the algorithm, if a lot of people do that on a high percentage, say it's served it to 100 people and 50 of those people have made an intentive action to it, then that algorithm then goes, people really like this, I'm going to serve it out to more people. And I've seen tracks go absolutely crazy on Spotify in discovery mode because they've just really connected in that platform. So it's actually a really helpful A&R tool for labels these days. There are countless singles that we've put out that just haven't had their moment but have connected in discovery mode. And all I do is just read those reports and it just shows me the tracks that we always knew were great, and they're sort of like putting themselves at the top of this report, and we then go back and work them. Like, in a marketing perspective, we then go, we knew this record was great, we didn't give it enough focus, let's go back and like let's talk about it on socials, and let's like do some market, let's do some promo, get a radio plugger on board, do all those things because we know that it's good and it's connecting in the algorithm. And so when you get those things, when you bring those things in as well, you then can build momentum. You can take those streaming numbers back to radio. The radio will start playing it, etc. And so it's just, you know, it's just being smart, and it's about building momentum. I think momentum is the key word on everything. And yeah, I would try and just build your communities digitally, not across, you know, the DSPs aren't social platforms. They sort of are trying to be more and more these days. But that's why I talked about SoundCloud so much, because it's almost like a social networking platform for music. And if you marry SoundCloud with your socials and you build communities and like broadcast channels and you share that sort of initial idea with people, you can speak to your closest fans and just ask them, do you like this or do you think it's shit? And if they come back and go, we love it, we want it, then release it. Hopefully, I actually would say, I hope people have fans that go, this is shit, we don't like it. I had one of my favourite artists ever, I won't name him, but I had one of my favourite artists ever in my kitchen once. And I was like, this is fucking mental. And he played me some of his new album or like ideas that he'd been in the studio writing, recording. And, you know, I'd built up a sort of like fairly good connection with him, close enough to then say to him, I think this is shit. Like, I love your band. Like, I love it. Like, I just don't, but I don't think it's that good. And that artist then said to me, thank you. Like, because everyone else has been telling me, this is fucking amazing. And like, but I'm just surrounded by yes men. And I think it's a really important A&R tool. Again, it's another sort of strand for another conversation, but I think, honesty and authenticity are like really required in the A&R conversations of just like, stop being such yes people in this industry and like try and give like constructive, creative criticism, you know? So that's just one little anecdote that I thought I would share in case useful. All good? Thank you.